How's it going, everyone? Imagine Create Destroy here. And today I got a new static grass applicator. I'm going to be using this to make a hobbit house. Let's go ahead and get started, yo. Alright, to start I'm going to go ahead and work on the base here. I'm going to use a few sheets of this XPS foam, and I'm just going to stack it up, make a little cliff area, and then one other little drop off area that I'm going to put a well in. We'll go ahead and just use a little hot glue to glue these into place, and then I just use some books to weigh everything down so it doesn't curl up on itself. And for these next sheets that I'm about to put on, I just cut one out and then stack them on top of each other. Use it as a template just to cut out the other ones so they fit perfectly there. Since the house is going to sit up on the actual cliff top, I'm going to build a pathway, a little hill with a cobblestone path leading up to the top. I just cut out some poster board squares here. I shook it up in this container with some rocks just to add some weathering and some detail. Now, to build this hill, it took me a little bit of thinking, but I figured I would start off with the rock pathway and then I would build from there. For the next step here, I'm going to use some cardboard strips just for somewhere for the plaster that I'm going to use to base the whole diorama to sit. After that, I'm going to use some cardboard strips to plan out the hill here and give it some shape. Alright, let's go ahead and move on to the actual hobbit house itself. To make the sloping shape, I'm just going to use these balsa wood strips. I cut them just a little bit shorter for each one, moving all the way down to the end, just tapering down to nothing. Listening back to that last clip, I realized I said sloping a little weird, but we'll go ahead and leave that in, it sounds funny. Now that the main shape for the building is done, I'm going to use a little more cereal box here for the roof. Go ahead and just glue this into place. Move on to the walls now. I'm going to use some thin balsa wood strips here. I just tacked them together with a little hot glue so I can trace out the shape of the wall here. I did that with both sides, and on the back side I just left it blank, but with the front I'm going to add a couple windows and some doors there. And I know I just said some doors, but we're going to actually do just one. I'm going to use the glue bottle here as the outline for this circular like hobbit hole door. Go ahead and carve that out, and then I did the same thing with a smaller paint bottle and a ruler to add on the squared bottoms. I'm sure you noticed with the design at first I was a little overzealous there. When I actually ended up carving out the piece of cardboard, it was a lot harder. But I did just use that piece of cardboard, cut out a little piece to glue onto the door to add a nice trim to it. To add some more detail here, I glued a ring around the door. I'm going to use a similar process for the windows here. I just used some of this black transparent film. So when you actually look at the windows, it gives it more of a glass-like look. Stuff like this I really feel like is the small details that really brings the build together, gives it a lot of depth and a lot of character too. After that, I'm going to move on, use some of these balsa wood strips to create a wooden beam frame over the top. Now I know this is wood, but it doesn't look woody enough for me. So to add some more wood grain texture, I came through with this little carving tool and my scalpel just to cut off some of the excess and create a little bit more of a weathered effect here. Moving on from the main building, I'm going to go ahead and get to work on the cliff. For this, I'm going to use a simple technique. I'm just going to do a lot of scores across these sides, and then I'm going to do some vertical cuts. After that, I'm going to come through with the back of my utility knife here. And I'm just going to pick everything away until you get a nice uneven texture throughout the whole thing. Since there is the gaps in between the XPS foam sheets, I'm just going to use some of this modeling paste to come through and fill all those gaps. Now for the painting, I kept this pretty simple. I did a base coat of black mixed with Mod Podge, and then came through with a tan, and I'm just going to use some accessory colors here to highlight some individual stones. And for this, I use a golden brown and this gray here, and then I kind of mix them together to make a third color. For the dry brushing, I'm going to come through with a suede and then a white from the top, just to highlight all the edges. Lastly, we'll come through with the washes here. I'm going to do a black wash, a green wash, and a brown wash. We'll do the black wash across the whole thing, and then the green and the brown wash we'll just do in selected spots. I did make one mistake on this diorama. Here I accidentally used this wildwood contrast paint instead of my brown wash. It's okay, I ended up kind of blending it together and it didn't look too bad. It's kind of something that you notice when you make it, but nobody else will ever notice when they actually see it. Now for the walls, I debated doing brick or stucco for this one. I decided to go with the blue stucco look. I'm going to use this plaster of Paris. I'm going to mix it up with some water, some blue paint, and then I'm going to go ahead and just fill in the walls on the Hobbit house with this. And just a little bit more. Once we get this filled in, I'll give it a little tap, even everything out. Go ahead and flip it around and do the same thing on the other side. On this side, I'm just going to use this lure lock bottle just for a little bit more precision, since I do have to get around the windows and the door here. Now we'll move on to a nice technique for basing. This is a technique I saw on Boylai Hobby Time. You're going to mix up some of that plaster of Paris with Mod Podge, and then we'll go ahead and just scrape that all onto the base there. Let it dry overnight. Once the base is dry, we'll go ahead and move on to doing the grass. You can watch me struggle here for a little bit to get this screw off. Get it right. No. In a second, right here. Yeah, okay, perfect. Nope, never mind. I'll finish getting this prepped, and then we'll move on to prepping the surface to do the static grass on. I'm going to use some of this PVA glue, spread this down, and this is what the static grass is going to stick to. And just a little bit more glue here. Okay, a little bit more glue here. And I was going to do more, but we ran out, so that should be good. And after thoroughly not reading the directions, I got started here. Quickly realized I was doing it wrong. Pretty sure I forgot to turn it on the first time. And then after reading it, I realized that you're supposed to be as close to the material as possible too. So go ahead and get the static grass applied here, shake off the excess, and we're going to let this dry overnight. We'll finish the rest of the grass areas off camera. We'll move on to the painting now. For the wood texture here, I'm going to use this wildwood contrast paint. It looked terrible when I put it over the black, so I'm going to rebase all of this white and then come back through with the contrast paint over the top. Now the contrast paint is supposed to give it a little bit more depth, which I feel like it was lacking. So I'm going to come through with a little dry brushing just to highlight the edges. After that, we'll move on to a mustard yellow that I use for the doors here. I'm going to do one thin layer so the door looks nice and weathered. Now that the majority of the painting is over, I'm going to move on to what I really feel like brings this whole build together. All the flowers and plants. This is really one of those steps that you can't overdo. I feel like there's never really too much when it comes to the bushes and the plants. I'm going to come through with some vines across the building here. I'm going to do the same thing once I plant some bushes on top. I'm going to use some vines to kind of come from the top to the bottom. Back to adding more detail, I'm going to just use some scatter here. I have some red and yellow leaves. And probably my favorite part of this build, I'm going to do a table and a wishing well. These are just some D&D minis come unpainted. I reprimed them black and I based them with a dark brown. I'm going to come through with some complementary brown colors, just working from the darkest to the lightest. And I'm going to do some selective highlighting here. This well is definitely my favorite part of the build. I think the painting came out absolutely amazing. I'm going to come through with some dark greens, a dark sea green, some grays, and then a blue that I mixed in some black with to darken it up just a little bit. We're going to go random with the rocks here, and then we're going to wet blend everything into each other. For the stones themselves, I picked a few different colors. I picked this lime green, almost like a yellow brown color, and then that same dark green that I used to base it. I'm going to come through and just do more selective highlighting as well. With the rocks here, I'm going as random as possible. You really don't have to be perfect with these. It's going to look great. I feel like it was looking a little bare, so I added some more flowers. On the cliff itself, I wanted to do some vines. I ended up taking those off. I felt like they looked a little creepy, and I added these vines with flowers. I'm going to glue in the rest of the little bits that I have here, and I'm going to make a little path leading down to the wishing well. For this, I just used some sand, a little isopropyl alcohol, so that PVA glue spreads a little bit easier. And last but not least, I'm going to come through with these mushrooms that my wife ended up making for me off camera. They really complete that mystical look, and I think they brought everything together. We'll paint the sides black here and call this build done. That is it for this video. Thank you to everyone who subscribed and watched to the end. Y'all have an amazing day, and I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.